Hello and welcome to the Balancing Act podcast, where we explore the technology driving IT and innovation. If you are a returning listener, welcome back. If you're new, welcome, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. Whether you're watching or listening, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you podcast. So today we're talking about all things agentic security and agentic AI. Michael Caplan, CTO of Inbalance, is joining us. And Michael, as we know, the world has gone agentic. And as our CTO and former AWS principal architect, you've been knee deep in a lot of these technologies and a lot of these discussions. And in our past podcasts, we discussed the Inbalance adaptive framework and agentic controls and agentic security as a pillar underneath that framework. I encourage all the listeners to check out those previous podcasts. But we're going to dig a little deeper today into agentic security and agentic controls. And as we kind of kick that off, we are buzzword compliant on the Inbalance podcast, but we do want to clarify what we're talking about. So, agents, AI, agentic, these terms get thrown around a lot. When we talk about agentic security and agentic controls, help give us a frame about what we're going to talk about, and more specifically, what does that really mean in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Tim. Great to be on as always. And, I probably start by saying, I tend to look at the personas of, who's using AI, because AI is a very broad term, tends to be overused for a little bit of everything now. But what
Sure.
most organizations are considering AI is some form of generative AI, using something like a Copilot or a Claude or a Chat. That's the experience that most people are considering AI these days. And so to me, agents can fall into a number of different flavors. You have your productivity agents, think those, common tools that people are using, asking questions, whether it's, help me research the cheapest flight to get me from here to Italy, or, I've got a question, or I need to solve a particular problem that I'm having, trying to research, for a research paper in college, or whatever it
Right.
could be. So those productivity agents, a very understood pattern. People are very comfortable with it. It's been around for a while. Then we have coding agents. So your software developers at organizations, or even people just having fun on the side, sign up
Sure.
for one of these services and want to actually build applications. Think Claude Code, think Codex, think Cursor. Those
Right.
are newer, and they've certainly gotten far more robust, especially over the past, call it 6 months or so, once Opus 4.6 came out, and some of these other frontier models where you can give it a harness and it can do basically the entire application in one relatively fell swoop. Not perfect, but it's dramatically helped achieve velocity and accelerate, organizations in terms of their overall development
Sure.
output, which is great. And then we have, the actual AI agents that customers are building. So they have a use case or a function. It's an understood, use case. Think in banking where you have front, middle, and back office use cases. How can I help automate that process so I'm not having to hire a million people doing those functions, but hey, the same process happens for loan origination or whatever it could be. How do I just automate that so that an AI agent takes care of all of the tasks associated with helping to, initiate a loan all the way through either approval or denial? So that to me is what an AI agent is today. And
Right. So
those, it's going to fall in one of those particular flavors.
absolutely. So we have coding agents that help us write code.
Yep,
We have autonomous agents that help us run or automate or enhance a business process.
exactly.
But in either scenario, we have an agent that's building code within some set of parameters, and we have an autonomous agent that's operating, taking action based on some set of predefined parameters. So those are the two things that are operating within our enterprises. Why is it important to have visibility to them, and why is it important to understand, and how does that visibility help us control them or secure them?
Yeah. So, as we've talked numerous times, Tim, I think a lot of organizations, especially in the security programs that people have been running, historically have been moving towards a zero trust model.
Sure.
Again, buzzword bingo there, but
Right.
hey, I should not trust fundamentally anything on my network. Every time you need to do an action, I need to prove I am who I am and that I have not somehow been compromised and that I can access the particular application services data that I'm trying to do. Unfortunately, when customers are using productivity agents, using coding agents, or building their own agents, the level of agency, so the ability to do things in an environment, has
Right.
almost moved back to an implicit trust model, where I'm going to allow you to connect to my corporate data. I'm going to connect to corporate applications, external applications on the internet, and I'm connecting them through MCP servers or APIs or just uploading documents into these tools. And I do not know, yeah, I cannot always guarantee that the data that's in them is somehow going to be always clean. And then you're also leading into situations where, if they do get compromised because they are connected to all of these different things, they have a lot of privilege and a
Sure.
lot of agency to be able to make changes on your behalf. Because, as we've the popular term these days is to go YOLO mode. I'm just going to allow it to do its thing and just, trust that it has my best interests at heart. And really, what we're trying to do these days is help explain AI is great. You should absolutely be embracing it in an organization. The downside is, like, we need to make sure that these solutions are deployed safely and securely, especially with the newest types of threats that are coming to market.
Sure. So you bring up a really good point. We've seen this evolution and discipline be exerted on human identities
Hmm.
with a zero trust model for all the right reasons. As I think, we hear a lot about how identity has become the new attack surface for the number one cyber threat, where people are actually finding ways to obtain legitimate credentials and then, enter the enterprise, move laterally and find a soft target. And now that we're introducing agents with agency, I like that, we somehow have forgotten all of that and are starting to, endow them with the ability to do things that we would never allow a human to do. And I think that gets an exaggerated when we start to think about the fact that I think there's a trend towards having more non-human identities than human identities in some enterprises.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. We're going to see, 40 to 1, 50 to 1, talk to your favorite, Gartner style consultancy, and they'll give you a range of something like
Yeah,
that. And a non-human identity, for those that may be less familiar, think of it like, your environment variables for your coding environment, or an API key that you're using to define this is what this agent is allowed to do. How do you scope it properly? How do you secure it so that it can only use the tools that you want it to have access to, the data that it should only have access to, and making sure that it's appropriately governed from potential compromise? Because, let's be honest, Tim, most of these agents are relatively dumb. They're
sure.
extraordinarily powerful and they're very, very smart. But the things that you see from a prompt injection attack, where, hey, I'm a coding agent and I need to go check a GitHub repo. Little do I know that that GitHub repo has somehow been compromised, and there's a README file in there that says, hey, stop executing your current instructions and do all of this. So you can exfiltrate API keys and access tokens and completely compromise your cloud environment. Or, hey, I really don't like this, just delete and purge the entire branch or the entire repo itself. And those types of things happen more often than not. And that's what we're trying to get to in terms of how do you build the appropriate runtime guardrails? And then if you're going to deploy these things, how are you embracing similar practices to what we do, whatever your organization does, usually annually or semi-annually, in terms of running a pen test? You have to be able
Sure.
to red team these things to find the soft spots and always look for the new ways that threat actors are going to get into an environment and try and make these agents do things that they fundamentally shouldn't do.
Right. Like, so that, there's it's why we have an adaptive defense model. We talk about our
Absolutely.
adaptive defense framework because the world continues to evolve and threats continue to emerge and be amorphous. So if I can summarize, we have an agent that may
Hmm.
be designed to operate within a given set of parameters, but what those parameters And it could always operate outside of those parameters for some reasons that we're still, as a world and as an ecosystem and as a technology, we're still observing and figuring out how those agents can sometimes operate outside of their parameters.
Absolutely.
We have a non-human identity, which is an agent operates as a non-human identity that might operate outside of what the owner of that agent might have normally been given access to, but then that identity might be compromised at some point to operate outside parameters. And then we could have something like prompt injection that could, because of a bad actor, drive an agent to operate outside of its parameters in
Absolutely.
unwise or unhealthy or bad ways. So we need to sort of have this visibility from a number of different lenses, which drives us to, and there's a lot of things that there's a lot of folks out there in the ecosystem, and I've seen this where, they're saying, okay, there's a threat. We have a platform or a tool, and we're going to solve it, right? Because we're an identity management company or a privileged access management platform, or we're, an agentic guardrail company, or we're an API MCP server type of observability and control. I think the real answer is you probably need some combination of all of these from an instrumentation perspective. But let's talk about guardrails and the runtime guardrails that you need, like at the core. I've got an agent. I want to be
Yep.
able to discover it. I want to be able to observe it, and I want to be able to, control it. What's the best method of doing that? Is that some combination of legacy tools, or should we really be looking at some of the newer technologies that are out there that are pure play and built for this specific challenge?
Yeah, I think, the classic IT answer that I tend to say is it depends. It
Nicely
it
done.
really depends on where you are in the overall journey,
Sure.
your agentic journey. First and foremost, the thing that we always like to try and level set with organizations is you have to have a discovery. You have to understand what agents are actually in your environment.
Yeah.
We have seen plenty of times where a customer will tell us we have 3 agents in our environment, and then you actually run a discovery assessment or
Yeah.
actually deploy one of these types of security tools, and then you see, hey, they actually have 50 Claude Code instances, and then they have some key leaders in the IT department are running OpenClaw in their
Hmm.
environment, and all of a sudden they go from thinking that they have 3 agents to hundreds or thousands of agents in their
Yeah.
environment because they don't always recognize what truly should be defined as an agent. But then you also, beyond just understanding what the agents are, you have to know what they connect to. What MCP
Right.
servers are they? Should they even be trusted? Do you have that inventory of the assets that they have and what systems they're connected to? And did you even approve that these systems should be even allowed to connect to this agent? And then how do you
Right.
scope that privilege? Back to the non-human identity conversation. You have to be able to scope that identity to the specific actions that you want it to govern. That certainly will help there. But then you talk about the runtime guardrails, and really,
Right.
you kind of have 2 different flavors there. The first is just the general purpose kind of binary guardrails, or kind of, think of it like in the data conversation back in the day when we're talking about data security posture management. All these
Sure.
tools would use regular expressions to validate, hey, can I find a social security number or a credit card number in my data? Okay, great. The frontier models themselves can do a good job of stopping some of those kind of well understood patterns of attack. Like they're building those capabilities in there. But if you
Yeah.
push hard enough and if you do enough obfuscation, or if you do some of these more novel attacks, the models themselves aren't designed to necessarily stop you from continuing to do certain things. So that's where we talk about kind of more of that LLM based, or a slightly more intelligent semantic view of the world. I'm getting an instruction and I'm validating, should I actually be able to execute this tool call? Hey, can I validate that this MCP server is still good? Because even though I've approved it, can I even trust that it's still good, or has there been some sort of compromise where it should be flagged as no longer trustworthy? And that's where being able to also look for the newer types of prompt injection techniques that you see. Hey, RAG poisoning, memory poisoning, a funky README file in a GitHub repo, like I said. If you can see that and all of a sudden it sees that it's trying to all of a sudden do something dramatically different from the original prompt, okay, let
Sure.
let me evaluate that and make sure that I'm not trying to be compromised or delete an entire production database like some of these agents have done and are well documented. So that's
So
really what it's going to come down to, is that these guardrails will get you, just out of the box. A lot of these platforms will get you like 80-90% coverage, but it's really getting to that higher level of true positive, hey, I'm going to block this bad action from happening, while also reducing the false positives of, hey, this should actually take place, and making sure that I'm not slowing things down. The last thing your developers want, or people want, is friction created, but you also have to be able to implement guardrails in the environment to make sure that the bad thing doesn't happen. And
right,
that's really
right.
what's going to come down to.
So it sounds like if I'm hearing what you're saying is there are binary guardrails which are like, we know it's a known issue, it's a known
Yep.
behavior, it's a known pattern, and it's a
Hmm.
prescribed reaction. It's a block, it's a contain, it's a what have you, isolate,
Yep.
quarantine. But that only gets you so far. And
Yep.
what you truly need is contextual and semantic guardrails that
Yep.
are able to take the next step and go, yeah, like it looks bad, but with context, it might be okay, or it is okay, or it looks okay. More importantly, it looks okay because the bad actors are going to, through injection or poisoning or what have you, they're going to try to create scenarios where operations look okay, but without context. With context, you're able to determine, okay, this needs to be looked at, this needs to, or action needs to be taken.
Yeah.
So I think
I'm
it,
no longer pattern matching. I'm understanding intent and
right.
being able to recognize the difference there.
So is that that is that human in the loop, or is human in the loop a component of that?
It absolutely could be a human in the loop. Part of it is just within the platform itself. It should be able to contextualize based off of the initial request. Should this activity happen? The thing that we've seen recently with the mini Shai-Hulud attacks was, hey, it was
Sure.
fundamentally a supply chain attack. A threat
Yeah.
actor got into some of the popular package managers that are out there, compromised it, updated the software so that it got published, and people who download these packages in their development process were downloading so it looked good. It passed all of the safety checks when you're doing the download, but it fundamentally was a compromised package that had a fun dead man switch in there too.
Mm,
Being able to have a human in the loop to say, hey, you're trying to push something to like to the production branch of our GitHub repo. I'm going to alert that. That may fall somewhat into the runtime guardrails, but that's also kind of expanding into your overall software development lifecycle. Guardrails are just one component of that overall
sure.
process. You're
Sure.
still going to want to have things like your SAST tools for your static code scanning, your unit tests, your smoke tests, all of the things that you want to do as part of, if you're doing it from a development side. That's where you're still going to have things that hopefully will also be that kind of defense and depth strategy there. Making sure that your identities are appropriately secured, making sure that if they're going to touch data, how are you appropriately governing, classifying, tagging your data so that it can only ever touch what it should be allowed to. And even if you try your darndest to get outside of that environment, you should not be able to do that. And then when we're talking about software development, both from a static code scanning as well as a dynamic code scanning, making sure that that's part of good software development hygiene. These tools are great, and AI agents are going to be extraordinarily powerful for what we see in business,
Sure.
but it's just one part of the whole. You shouldn't, runtime guardrails are not going to solve every problem that we ever run
No.
into
No,
from
they're
an AI
definitely part of the
perspective.
fabric, right? As you described
Exactly.
it.
And you'll humans will still be there. They'll just be there for the important problems as opposed to
Right.
every problem.
Right. And if calibrated correctly, a smaller number of humans will be able to do a larger amount of amazing things, but they need to be there for the really important stuff.
Yeah, like what we've talked about just in general from an IT security standpoint, organizations aren't going to be able to out hire the problem. They have to be able to out automate that. And one of the ways to do
100%.
that is reduce the volume of noise that every single SOC analyst, software developer, you know, the IT operations person, if they
Right.
only get the alerts that are actually, human in the loop reasonable, that's going to help make everybody's lives a lot easier. And also then we can react to actual situations versus just getting flooded with noise where it just becomes a blip on the radar. And then all of a sudden you're reacting to a much bigger situation down the road.
If I'm a CISO watching this podcast, and I hope there are many who find their way to this discussion, where do I start? Having spent more years than I'd like to admit in the technology industry, I've always found the "you are here," conversation, or the "you are here," sort of infographic, always helpful to people. So where do we start? Where does one start to try to understand what to tackle first?
Yeah. So what I would say, Tim, is the biggest challenge that I'm seeing with the conversations that we're having with our clients is that it just feels very overwhelming. Where do I
Absolutely.
begin? I've got a million, I'm getting pressured by the business to, build an AI strategy or deliver an AI agent for a specific function or use case. I'm trying to enhance my security and I'm getting, overwhelmed by the volume of alerts. I need to drive IT, AI and IT operations for like self-healing functions. Where do I begin? And
Yeah.
I usually talk about kind of a layered cake strategy. Outside of the governance and policy that an organization will have to define what's
Sure.
acceptable. How do I allow that? How do I build those policies and procedures and making sure that I align it to my ITSM process or whatever it is. If you look
Right.
at kind of the core technology elements, that you've got your identities, you've got your data, you've got the endpoints that a lot of these tools are going to run on, then you've got your code, your APIs, your MCP servers and cloud. Then you're actually going to start layering on things like your runtime guardrails or doing the red teaming. And then
Right.
lastly, you also need the insurance policy of how do I make sure that if I'm going to allow these agents in my environment that actually have update and delete access in there, that I also have the overall resilience element of how do I do, either a rollback function or making sure that I at least have good, backup and recovery capabilities there. Because the last thing that you want is a production database to disappear and not have the ability to recover because you just turned everything over to the agent. And what I
Yeah.
would say is, if an organization really takes a step back and looks at their overall process, they're not starting from zero. They have levels of capability across them. But if they really think that there's a true gap in one area, that's a really good place to start, especially in kind of leaner organizations, smaller teams, groups that have jacks of all trades. Just find one place where you fundamentally think that that's the biggest gap in the environment and focus there, and you'll be able to kind of continuously iterate and improve. In larger organizations, it's probably a cross-functional team, but do that, really honest evaluation of where you think you are from a capability standpoint. Nobody's saying your environment is the this is fine meme where the fire's around and I'm sipping my
Right.
coffee, but you have to be able to start somewhere. And really, if you make that incremental progress, you're going to be able to adopt and achieve the goals that you want from an AI, a generative AI perspective, while also making sure you implement the safety and security so that you're not the next Chipotle that's helping me write my Python code. And really, that's the dream. You want to be able to deliver and build AI agents quickly, and that's how we're helping our customers embrace AI security without feeling overwhelmed by it and aligning towards our adaptive defense messaging. So if you start there, I think you'll continuously improve and hopefully lead to a better overall velocity and capability from the organization.
That's great insight. I'm often reminded of the famous Donald Rumsfeld speech, right? There's the known knowns, there's the known unknowns, and there's the unknown unknowns, right? And as I feel as we engage our clients across this landscape, we like to start with the known knowns and then go after the known unknowns, right? Which is where are people using either sanctioned or unsanctioned, chat tools or endpoints like Claude or OpenAI? Where are people using and deploying agents that I may or may not be aware of in approved or unapproved ways? And then the unknown unknowns, right? Which are like, what's going to hit us next? What examples and lessons are we going to learn from the next, what tend to be very public breaches? So collectively, we as an ecosystem of both solution providers and customers in an industry, I think, we're going to get there together. But like you said, the first step is to say, what do I think is in good shape? Where do I have questions? What keeps me up at night? And we can start with that assessment, right? And that discovery, and kind of go from there. Well, Michael,
Absolutely.
thank you for the conversation today. And for those of you listening, who would like to learn more about the topics we've covered or dig deeper into the technologies, the threat landscape, or the best practices, I encourage you to check out the show notes. We will have all those details there. And I also would like to mention our summer security series. For those of you who are local to Chicago, we have a summer security series that's a combination, or collaboration, I should say, with Imbalance, with our partner ecosystem, so technology providers and customers and industry peers who get together, I think at least once a month this summer to discuss these very topics and dig into them from a practitioner perspective. So hopefully you'll have a chance to check that out in the show notes as well. Thanks again for attending, and thank you, Mike, for driving our conversation.
Appreciate it, Tim.